Everyone on that road rode past me. I want to start there, because it's the truest thing I know about people, and about the one who wasn't like them. I was 4 hours into dying when I heard the wagons. Two of them, freighters bound for the Cinnabar Wells assay, and I lifted what was left of my arm off the sand, and I called out in a voice that didn't carry past my own teeth. They saw me. I know they saw me, because the second driver turned his head and looked a long moment, the way a man looks at a thing he means to forget by supper. Then he faced front, and the wheels went on grinding south, and the dust they raised settled over me like the territory was already covering its work. I don't blame them all these years on. The Forsaken Road earned its name honest. 90 miles of caliche and salt pan between the river and the Salt Lake Basin, no shade taller than a man's hat, and one bad stretch in the middle where the trail went so white in the noon glare that horses balked at it. Robbers favored that white mile. They'd favored it with me. 3 of them came out of a dry wash at first light, took my horse and my saddlebags and the good colt my father carried, and the youngest of them, a boy with a soft mouth, had wanted to leave me my canteen. The oldest had laughed at him and emptied it on the ground in front of me so I'd watch. So I had no water and no horse and a sun coming up like a furnace door, and I was Ezra Crane, who owned cattle on 4 ranges and grass clear to the Sanger Rim, and a bank's worth of paper in a strongbox in Cinnabar Wells, and not 1 acre of it was worth a spoonful of spit out there. I'd been crossing alone and plain dressed on purpose, the way I did once a year to see my outfits without the foreman cleaning up the place ahead of me, and the joke of it was that no living soul on that road knew me from a drifter. The land doesn't care what your strongbox says. I learned that lying on my back watching a buzzard take its patient circles, and it was the first true thing the Forsaken Road taught me. The second was a smudge of green. I'd been crawling toward it without knowing it was real. A man's eyes lied to him out there. I'd seen lakes that weren't, and a whole town once, white-walled and shimmering, that turned out to be a salt flat. So when I saw that low fringe of cottonwood off the trail, hazed and trembling, I told myself it was another one. But I crawled to it anyway, because a man who's quit crawling has quit altogether, and I wasn't ready to give my father's people the satisfaction. It took me the better part of the afternoon to make a half-mile. The last of it I did on my belly, and I came up over a little rise of red rock, and there it was, true as scripture. A seep of water in a stone basin, ringed with green, and beyond it a soddy dug into the bank with a brush ramada out front, a pole corral with 1 sway-backed mule in it, and a hand-lettered board nailed to a post that said Lone Mercy, water 5 cents. And under that, smaller, like an afterthought, all welcome. I didn't have 5 cents. I didn't have anything but my thirst and the rags of my pride, and I'd have traded every head of cattle I owned for the chance to put my whole face in that basin. I got maybe 10 feet down the slope toward it before my arms quit, and I went down and didn't get up. And the last thing I saw before the light went out was a woman coming out from under the ramada with a rifle in her hands. When the light came back, the rifle was leaned in the corner, and she was kneeling over me with a tin cup. "Slow," she said. "You drink it fast, you'll bring it back up and waste it, and I haven't got it to waste." She tipped a little into my mouth. It was warm, and it tasted of stone, and it was the finest thing I have ever swallowed in this life. I reached for the cup, and she held it back. "Slow," she said again, and there was iron in it. I learned her name in pieces over the next 2 days, the way you learn anything from a person who doesn't volunteer much. Yola Mercer, widow. She'd come to Lone Mercy 4 years back with a husband named Tom, and a notion that a water stop on the Forsaken Road would keep them, and the road had kept Tom under a cairn of red rock up on the rise where I'd first seen the green. Snakebite, she told me, the once she spoke of it, and the way she said it, flat, finished, told me she dug the grave herself and said the words herself because there'd been no one else within 40 miles to help her do either. She fed me broth made of a jackrabbit she'd snared and cornmeal mush, and she changed the dressing on my arm where the fall had opened the skin to the bone, and she did all of it the way she did everything I ever saw her do, without fuss, without asking thanks, without any softness on the surface of it at all. The softness was underneath. It took me a while to learn to read it. The first night, when the fever came up in me and I shook the whole cot apart, I woke once to find her sitting beside me in the dark with her hand flat on my chest, just holding it there, the way you'd hold a fence post you weren't sure would stand. When she saw my eyes were open, she took the hand away quick and went and tended the fire and didn't come back till morning. What I want you to understand, what took me the rest of my life to say plain, is what it cost her to keep me alive. That seep put out maybe 40 gallons a day in a good month, and it wasn't a good month. The summer had been long and dry, and the basin was down to a third of itself, and every cup she poured into me was a cup she couldn't sell to the freighters and the drovers who'd stop, and every coin off those was the only thing standing between her and the road back east. She couldn't have made even if she'd wanted to. She was poorer than I had been since I was a boy. And she had taken in a man she'd never seen, who could do nothing for her, who might well die on her floor and leave her a stranger to bury. And she'd done it the moment she saw I was a man and not a mirage, before she knew one thing about me, before there was any reason on God's earth to think it would ever come back to her. That is the thing I built the rest of my days around, and I am getting ahead of myself, and I will slow down. The fever broke on the third day and left me weak as a kitten but in my right mind, and I lay on the cot under the ramada in the cool of the morning and watched her work, and I started to see how thin the wire was that she walked. A rider came in around midday, a hard-faced man on a good blood horse, too good for that country, with a second man behind him, and I saw Yola's whole back change before they'd even drawn rein, the way a cat goes long and low. She set her rifle in the crook of her arm, not pointed at anything, just present, and she went out to meet them at the edge of the green. I couldn't hear all of it, I heard enough. The hard-faced man called her Mrs. Mercer in a voice that made the name an insult, and he talked about water rights and recorded claims, and how a woman alone couldn't be expected to hold a thing she couldn't defend. And he said the name Augustin Das the way men say the name of the one they answer to. He left her a paper. She didn't take it. He set it on the post under the lone mercy board and weighted it with a stone, and they rode off the way they'd come, north, toward where I'd later learn Das was buying up every drop of water in the Salt Lake Basin one widow and one busted homesteader at a time, so that come the next dry year he'd own the only thing that mattered out there, and could name his own price for it from every man who needed to cross. When they were gone, she took the paper off the post and read it standing, and then she folded it small and put it in her apron and went back to mending the corral rail like nothing had happened. I asked her about it that evening, when she was spooning more of the mush into me, and she looked at me a while before she answered. "He's bought the seep at Antelope and the well at Tres Piedras," she said. "He's bought out the Holly's place and the Dietrich. There's me and there's the spring at Calabash Sink, and old man Prout at Calabash is sick and won't last the winter. When Prout's gone, mine's the last water on 90 miles that Das doesn't own. He's offered me $200. He'll come down to 100 when I don't take it, and then he'll stop offering." "What do you mean, stop offering?" "I mean he'll find another way." She said it without drama, the way she'd said snakebite. "There's no law out here but distance, mister. The county seat's 140 miles. By the time anybody official ever rode out to look at whatever happened, it'd be a year old and the buzzards would have finished the testimony." She set the bowl aside. "You should sleep. You're going to want your strength." "For what?" "For leaving." She almost smiled. It went across her face like wind across water and was gone. "I can't feed two on what this puts out, and you'll want to be a long way from here when Das decides he's done offering. A stranger on the property's just one more thing for him to make ugly." She was right, and she was protecting me, and I knew both at once, and something in me that had been packed in stone for 11 years cracked a hair. I didn't say anything. I wasn't a man who said things. But I lay there in the dark that night, and I thought about my wife, Mary, dead of the fever along with our boy Tom. And isn't that a thing? that her husband had been a Tom too, and I never told her. And I think now I should have 11 years in the ground, and I thought how I had answered all that grief by getting hard and getting rich, as though enough cattle and enough grass could fill the place where they'd been. And here was a woman with nothing, with less than nothing, with a paper in her apron that meant her ruin, and she'd poured her last water into the mouth of a man who couldn't pay her a nickel because he was thirsty and she had water. I'd had it backwards my whole life. I'd thought the having was the thing. She knew it was the giving. I didn't leave when I could have. I want that understood too, because it's the only thing I ever did out there I'm proud of without a knot in it. I got my strength back over the next 2 weeks, and I didn't say who I was, and I didn't ride for Cinnabar Wells where my men and my money and my name were waiting to set the whole thing right with a wave of my hand. I told myself it was because I was still weak. Then I told myself it was because she needed the help, and that part was true. I'll get to it. But under all of it was a thing I wasn't ready to say even to myself, which was that I had not wanted to leave the company of Iola Mercer, and that the soddy at Lone Mercy, dug into a red bank at the worst end of the worst road in the territory, was the first place in 11 years that had felt to me like a place a man could stop. So I made myself useful, because that I knew how to do. I mended the corral she hadn't the muscle to mend right. I cleared the seeped stone basin of the silt that had half choked it, working a whole hot day at it with my hands and a busted shovel, and that evening it put out near twice what it had, and she stood looking at the water rising clear, and she didn't say thank you. She never once said thank you, and I came to understand that was its own kind of respect. But she made cornbread that night with the last of the molasses, which I learned later she'd been saving against Tom's birthday out of a habit she couldn't break. And I have never since eaten anything that meant more. I rebuilt the ramada so it threw real shade. I doctored the sway-backed mule's cracked hoof. When the freighters came through, I learned the trade of the place. 5 cents a head for stock, a dime for a man and his fill, and Iola never once turned away the ones who didn't have it, the busted prospectors and the runaway boys and the one family with a dead wagon and 4 children who came through gray with thirst. All welcome, the board said, and she meant the all of it. I asked her once how she expected to hold against DOS if she gave the water away to every hard luck case that crawled in, and she looked at me like I'd asked why the sun came up. Because they're thirsty, she said, and I've got water. And that was the whole of her philosophy, and I have spent 40 years failing to improve on it. DOS's men came twice more while I was there. The second time there were 4 of them, and they were less polite, and they cut the corral rail I'd mended and let the mule loose into the flats, so we lost half a day running it down. And one of them, the hard-faced one named Calder, looked at me a long while where I stood by the ramada and said, "Who's the hired man, Mrs. Mercer?" And Iola said, "He's nobody. Drifter. Working for his keep." And I let it stand because it was the truth as anybody out there could see it, and because the moment I said otherwise I became a thing DOS had to reckon with, and I wasn't ready yet to be reckoned with on her ground. But Calder's eyes stayed on me, and I knew he'd remember the face, and I knew that mattered, and I filed it away. I'll tell the night it turned, because it did turn on a night, the way these things do. It came on to storm, one of those dry country gully washers that build all afternoon and then break the whole sky open at once. The thunder ran the mule near Frantic and Iola, and I were out in it past dark, getting the stock into the lee of the bank and lashing down the ramada brush before the wind took it. And somewhere in the soaking middle of it, her foot went into a wash that the rain had already turned to a sluice of red water, and she went down, and the water took her a good 20 feet before I got hold of her wrist. I hauled her up the bank, and we sat there in the streaming dark with the lightning showing us each other's faces, and she was shaking, not from the cold, I think, but from the once-in-4 years feel of being caught before she hit bottom, and I did the thing I'd been not doing for 3 weeks. I put my arm around her, and she didn't go stiff and pull away the way she had with the cup that first morning. She turned in under my shoulder and put her face against my wet shirt and stayed there, and we sat in the rain a long time, 2 people the whole country had ridden past, holding on. That's all of it. I told you it was clean, and it was. We sat in the rain. But I knew, sitting there, that I was not going to be able to ride out and leave her to Augustin Das, and I knew that meant I was going to have to become Ezra Crane again, and I lay awake the rest of that wet night working out how. I told her in the morning. Some of it. I told her I had to ride to Cinnabar Wells on business of my own, and that I'd be back inside 10 days, and that she was not to take any paper from Das's men, nor sign anything, nor leave the property, no matter what they told her. And I said it with enough weight that she stopped with the coffee pot and looked at me hard. "Who are you?" she said, "not afraid, just done being lied to." And I found I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand in that soddy and tell her I'd had a strongbox in town the whole time she was emptying her last basin into me. Not yet. Not before I'd made it mean something. "A man who pays his debts," I said. 10 days, Iola, hold the spring 10 days. I took the mule. I left her my word, which was worth nothing to her because she didn't know what it was backed by, and I left her something else. I'd hidden it under the cornmeal crock where she'd find it when she went to bake, a paper of my own, a note in my own hand made out to draw $200 against Crane cattle at the Cinnabar Wells Bank, so that whatever happened she'd have the price of the spring in her hand and never have to take it from Das. I didn't sign my full name to it. I wasn't brave enough yet. I signed it the Drifter, and the banker who'd known me 20 years would honor it on sight, and I figured that was time enough for the truth. It wasn't. That's the part that wakes me still. I made Cinnabar Wells in 2 hard days on that poor mule, and I walked into my own affairs like a man come back from the dead, which, near enough, I was. They'd given me up, and I set the machinery turning. I had my foreman, Risk, put riders on the road. I went to the land office and pulled the recorded claims and found what I'd feared, which was that Das had been quietly filing on the water sources under a survey company's name, papering over the squatters and the widows with money and lawyers, 140 miles from anyone they were robbing. But I found something else too, because I had the means to look and the widows hadn't. That Tom Mercer had filed proper on Lone Mercy Spring 4 years back, a homestead claim with the water right attached, and that the filing was good, and that the only thing wrong with it was that no one with power had ever stood behind it. The law was on Iola's side. It had been the whole time. It just hadn't had a friend. I meant to be that friend the legal way, the slow way, with a lawyer and the recorded claim and a letter to the territorial marshal. And I'd have done it, and it would have worked, except that Das didn't wait the 10 days, because Das had a man named Calder who'd been bothered 3 weeks by the face of a hired drifter at Lone Mercy who didn't move like a hired drifter, and who'd ridden into Cinnabar Wells behind me and seen the drifter walk into the Crane cattle office and get called Mr. Crane by the clerk on the step. So Das knew, before I got back, that the last widow on the Forsaken Road had Ezra Crane's interest. And a man like Das, when he learns a thing he's been squeezing has suddenly got a friend with more money and more men than he has, does not back off. He moves while there's still time to make it look like the road did it. I rode out of Cinnabar Wells with Risk and 8 men at first light of the 9th day, a day early, with a cold thing sitting in my chest that I couldn't name and didn't like. And we pushed the horses harder than was kind, and we came up over the red rise above Lone Mercy on the morning of the 10th day to the smell of smoke. The Ramada was burned, the soddy roof had fallen in, and the seep, they'd done the cruelest thing the country offered, the thing I have hated men for ever since. They'd thrown a dead steer down into the stone basin to foul the water, so that even if she held the claim she'd hold a poisoned spring, and the green was already going gray at the edges. I came down that slope the way I'd crawled up it 3 weeks before, except I came down running, and I was certain, I will tell you plain that for the length of that run I was certain, that I had killed her, that my pride had killed her, that I'd had the means to set it right the first hour and I'd held it back to make a better story of it, and the bill for that had come due on a woman who'd never owed a cent. She came out of the dugout with the rifle. She was burned a little along one arm and her face was black with smoke, and she'd been awake all night. And she'd held them off, one woman in the dark behind a fallen roof. She'd held off Calder and 3 others with a rifle and a sure hand, and the simple unwillingness to die that I'd seen in her from the first cup of water. They'd burned what they could reach and fouled what they could foul, but they had not got her off her land because she would not be got off her land. And when she saw it was me coming down the slope with 8 riders behind me, she lowered the rifle and stood there swaying. And the first thing she said to Ezra Crane, for she knew by then, she'd had it from Calder's own mouth, shouted across the dark to break her, "Your drifter's a cattle king and he's left you to it." The first thing she said was not "Where were you?" and was not "Who are you?" and was not any of the things I deserved. She said, "There's a steer in my spring, help me get it out." And we did. Before anything else, before I tended her arm, before Risk and the men rode north after Calder, before one word of explanation or apology passed between us. The 2 of us and a rope, and the mule hauled that dead steer up out of the stone basin and dragged it off across the flats for the buzzards. And then we dug, both of us, all that day, deepening the basin and cutting a new channel to let the fouled water run off and the clean come up behind it. The way I'd cleaned the silt out 3 weeks before, and by evening the seep ran clear again, slow but clear, and Yola Mercer knelt down and put her whole face in it the way I'd wanted to that first day. And when she came up she was crying, which I had not once seen her do, and I understood it was not for the spring. I told her everything that night, sitting in the wreck of her Ramada with the stars coming out, who I was, what I had, why I'd come plain dressed onto her road, and how the robbers had stripped it all off me and left me to die, and how she'd saved a man who could have bought her spring 40 times over and not felt it, when she had next to nothing and every reason to pass me by like all the rest. I told her about Mary and the boy, the first time I'd said their names aloud in 11 years. And I told her I'd been a coward about the truth, that I'd wanted to come back and set it all right grandly instead of just telling her, and that my vanity had cost her the Ramada and the roof and near cost her life, and I asked her to forgive it, knowing I'd no right to ask. She was quiet a long time. The seep ticked and trickled behind us in the dark, coming back to itself. "I didn't pour that water in you to get a roof built," she said at last. "I poured it because you were dying and I had it. If it had stayed that if you'd been a drifter and rode off and I'd never seen you again, it would have been worth the doing. You don't understand that yet. You're still keeping books." She turned and looked at me, and the iron was there, but so was the thing underneath it, out in the open now where I could see it whole. "But I'll tell you what I won't forgive, Ezra Crane. I won't forgive you trying to make this a thing you did for me. You want to put your money and your men and your name behind my claim, fine. It's my claim. Tom filed it, I held it. You'll stand behind it, not in front of it. I keep my spring. I keep my board up. All welcome, 5 cents a head, and the broke ones drink free, and that's not your call to change. You understand me?" I understood her. I have spent 40 years understanding her. The rest you can guess, and I'll be brief, because the rest is just 2 people living, and the good part of a life doesn't make much of a story. It's only the wanting and the losing that come out in words. Risk ran Calder down at Tres Piedras and brought him in, and Augustin Das, who'd built his whole empire on the certainty that no one with power would ever ride 140 miles for a widow, learned that someone would, and that the law he'd been papering over had been good all along and now had a friend. He lost it in the courts at the county seat, every fouled claim of it, the recorded right standing for the widows and the busted homesteaders the way it should have from the start, and he sold out and went to California, and I never heard of him again, and I've never wasted a thought on him I could spend elsewhere. I married Iola Mercer in the spring, in Cinnabar Wells, in a borrowed coat, and she wore the dress she'd been married to Tom in because she said a dress was a dress and she'd not waste money on vanity, and that was the truest thing about her I could put on this page if I had 1,000 more. We kept Lone Mercy. We never gave it up. Folks thought it was a fool thing. the wife of the biggest cattleman in the territory, keeping a 5-cent water stop at the bad end of the forsaken road. But Yola kept it, and she kept the board up. And when the dry years came, and they came, the only difference Crane money made was that the basin was stone-lined now and ran cool and deep, and that no man's child ever again died of thirst on those 90 miles, because there was always water at Lone Mercy, and the broke ones always drank free. All welcome. She'd have it no other way, and after a while neither would I. We're both old now. The road's a county road, graded, and there's a rail spur 40 miles north that took most of the freight traffic years ago. But the spring still runs, and we still live beside it half the year, in a real house now with a real roof. And the old soddy's still there too, sunk back into its red bank. And I sit out front of it some evenings the way I'm sitting now, and I look at the rise where Tom Mercer's cairn is, and where one day not too far off they'll put us, the two of us. And I think about the afternoon. I crawled up over that rock more dead than alive, and saw a smudge of green that turned out to be true. Everyone rode past me on that road. I want that to be the thing you remember if you remember any of it. The whole world that had a wagon and a canteen looked at a dying man and rode on, and the one soul out there who had nothing to spare gave me her last cup and asked nothing, and expected nothing. And that, not the cattle, not the grass, not the strong box, none of the things I spent half my life mistaking for a life. That is the only wealth that ever came back to me multiplied. She taught me you can't lose what you give away. You can only lose what you keep. There's water at Lone Mercy still. All are welcome. The broke ones drink free. That was her doing. I just had the good fortune to be dying in the right place, in front of the only person in the territory who'd stop.